I feel like they're setting us up to fail, she exclaimed. I watched as tears began to well up in this middle-aged, competent DSP's eyes. She was so frustrated, and she went on to explain that she felt as though her direct supervisor and even their supervisor wasn't listening, that they were promising levels of support that she wasn't receiving, and she had reached just about the end of her rope, was already starting to look for other jobs. And as I sat there and listened to her, she didn't realize how extremely ironic it was, the things she was sharing with me, based on a conversation I had had with her supervisor just 1 week prior to this. Hello, difference maker, and welcome to IDD Leader, the podcast that's all about helping IDD providers retain and grow their DSP workforce using behavioral science. I'm your host, Nate Beers, and today we're going to look at the top 5 reasons staff are leaving your organization and what to do about it. Specifically, we're going to dive into to answer this question: what could you as a manager or a leader or a director or CEO, what could you have done differently to prevent your employees from leaving their jobs? Now, before we dive into that, I want to clarify, there are staff that leave that were never a good fit to begin with, and there's those that we wish wouldn't have left, those that got away. And we're not really going to look at that first group, which is those that were never a good fit to begin with. It is certainly worth doing at a different moment, because oftentimes, if we're hiring quite a few individuals that are not a good fit, it points to something in our recruitment process is not working the way that it should be. We're just not getting the right target people, or we have the bar set too low. And so kind of the whole warm body syndrome, we're just throwing anybody in there. And there are lots of different approaches that can be taken to address that. But for today's conversation, we're really going to focus on that latter group. It's the folks that got away that we never wanted to leave, that we had wished would stick with us. And what could we have done differently? And really, what can we do differently to keep that dynamic from happening as we move forward? To finish the story that I started, the irony, as this DSP was just kind of, I wouldn't say pouring out her heart, that sounds a little too dramatic, but as she was sharing very candidly these frustrations she was having, the great irony for me was when I had talked with her supervisor the week before, her supervisor was just expressing to me how many things she was trying to do to serve and help this DSP and really the whole team underneath her. And on the one hand, the supervisor did express some, I would say, lack of clarity on knowing which things to prioritize. But overall, she thought it was going well. And she was clueless as to how far gone this particular staff member, and I believe some others were, that were working directly for her. And I've seen this dynamic over and over again, the disconnect between supervisors and employees. But the good news is there's so much that can be done to address it. We'll get there in just a few minutes. Gallup did a survey a couple years ago where they were asking people who had just recently left their job on purpose, meaning that it was a voluntary leaving, what could your manager or organization have done to prevent you from leaving your job? And there were a number of things listed, but today we're going to go over the top 5 things that they have listed on this survey, because really I believe all of these are relevant for the IDD industry, along with other industries. This survey was not specific to the IDD industry, but all 5 of the top ones really do affect the work with individuals with intellectual disabilities and the workforce. The first one that came up, the number one reason, the number one thing that supervisors or organizations could have done to prevent individuals from leaving their jobs was to provide additional compensation or benefits. Surprise! Are you surprised? Probably not, right? Pay people more and they want to stay longer. That is not a shocking concept. As it relates to this field, the truth is most of your staff probably qualify for state assistance. This is a low-wage field. It's tied very closely to reimbursement rates that are really pretty low. And the needs in this field, like the kind of work that DSPs and other frontline staff are doing, these are high-need situations that they're facing and that they're addressing. And so my guess is you've probably wrestled with this one. And depending on your role, you may or may not have much of a say or much of a perceived say in how much staff are being compensated. I want to reframe this question a little bit to you, or this issue to you, and encourage you to ask these two questions. First, let's get really curious. How are the higher paying agencies doing it? There are higher paying agencies out there. How are they affording that? They're getting the same reimbursement rates that you are, but they must be managing their money differently in a number of different ways. So getting really curious about that. Start knocking on doors until you find the answer to that question. Number two, how could we pay our frontline employees $2 more per hour? In other words, if you just said, we're going to do it, and then the question would be, well, how do we do it? What kind of creative solutions do we need? Where could we save that kind of money, or where could we make more of that kind of money? And starting down that path, that line of thinking, will start to lead towards solutions rather than just accepting it as a done deal or a static thing. One more thought on this along the lines of compensating more is how quick is your agency at paying back your workforce or reinvesting right back into your workforce whenever the reimbursement rates do go up, even if they just edge up a little bit. But how quick are you guys to pass that along to your staff, or if there are other forms of compensation that come in to your organization? And my experience is that the stronger, healthier organizations are quick to pass that on to their staff in various different ways, from one-time bonuses to increasing the base salaries, and not just increasing the base salaries for new employees, but also making sure to do that for the existing staff as well, so they're not resentful for all the new individuals coming to work there. So that's number one, looking at how do we compensate more. The second most common answer for what could your organization have done to prevent you from leaving your job is having more positive interpersonal interactions with their manager or with their supervisor. Over and over again, I've seen simple breakdowns in communication or in trust or in the goals. Like maybe things were aligned pretty well. 80% was there. But man, that 20% can really come back to bite you. Or maybe the expectations were just a little different between a supervisor and their direct reports. So the direct reports think they're doing exactly what was most important and what was asked of them. And the supervisor is pulling out their hair feeling like, I've just asked them to do this 10 times and they're just not getting it. It's so easy to have these kinds of breakdowns that happen between really any two levels within an organization, or I mean, let's be real here. It happens in marriages, in families, in just human relationships, period. But these things, when they get addressed, can really help make it a sticky experience where staff want to stay working there longer. Because in the presence of trust and in the presence of feeling valued, frontline staff members stick around a whole lot more than when there is a lack of trust or a lack of feeling supported. A couple of the solutions that are related to this involve having frequent and quality or high impact supervision meetings with your frontline staff. If you're a director, I'm not talking that you have to have it yourself, but that building that into the culture of your organization, that the frontline supervisors are having it with their frontline staff, so that frontline staff are having a place where they feel heard, where they're receiving a lot of positive feedback, but also some constructive criticism or areas for improvement, and that they're also getting the tools that they need to be successful in their job, that those things aren't just going and going for long periods of time unaddressed. Another aspect of solving these types of breakdowns that can happen is providing additional training to frontline supervisors to be successful at not just the technical aspects of their job, but at actually managing people. This is a huge factor in the success that they will experience with the people that answer to them. A lot of people get thrown into that frontline supervisor position they might get training on how to do certain aspects of the job, but they don't necessarily have the training on how to manage people, how to handle when someone comes to you with a complaint, or if you become aware that there's a conflict between two team members. My, oh my, that happens so often and so easily. What's a manager to do in that situation? And so providing ongoing training at the aspect of their job that involves managing people. And one other suggestion or thought on how to avoid some of these breakdowns really is to increase the transparency between all the levels of management, including frontline supervisors, with that frontline workforce. If something's not going well, being perfectly honest about it and being honest about what's being done to address it. And that actually leads right into the number three reason, the number three thing that organizations could have done to prevent those who quit their job from leaving, and that is addressing organizational issues. Now, the Gallup poll, it does not specify what kinds of organizational issues these are. However, in my experience of observing some of this, there could be wide-ranging issues. But really, I would say that there's two things that if an organization can get these two things right, it will solve at least 50%, probably significantly more, but at least 50% of the issues related to, it could be the culture of the organization. It could be that there's just inconsistencies between what is hoped for versus what is actually being accomplished or being done. There could be organizational issues where I've seen where there's a leadership vacuum, where a high-level manager or director resigns. There was no leadership pipeline in place. There was no one there to take their role. Maybe one or two of those people directly under them also resigns because they're upset about how all that happened. And now there's this huge vacuum of leadership, and then all kinds of things just start falling through the cracks for the frontline staff. So could be a lot of issues going on, but two things that organizations can do to address there's a host of issues. Number one, look at alignment. Do our processes, do our actions align with our values? Almost every organization I've ever talked to has a great mission statement, or at least a good or decent mission statement, have a pretty solid list of values. So it's not usually what's stated that's a problem. It's a question of, do our processes, in other words, how we do things around here, are we doing things the way that we want to be doing things? And so getting alignment between an organization's values and their processes. And that's done at both the macro level and the micro. You got to look at some of those broader sweeping changes that might need to take place, but also a lot of those very specific things of how different situations are handled. If we say we value our staff, how's our vacation time? How's our PTO time? If we say that we do person-centered care for our clients, but then we're always trying to fit them into the boxes that we need because it's more convenient for us as an organization or for that particular house manager or whatever it is, then again, there's this lack of alignment. So really kind of looking at that alignment issue. Secondly, ownership. Who owns the culture of the organization? There's this great quote by author and thought leader Henry Cloud, and he's defining leadership, and he says leadership is two things. It's what I promote and what I allow. What am I promoting as a leader, and then what am I allowing for those that are around me or those that work for me? This often happens when there's an unhealthy or toxic culture at an organization. Usually there's a significant lack of ownership that everyone wants to pass the buck to somebody else. But here's where I would challenge that, or would encourage things to go, which is having this mindset from the top and then communicating it, modeling it, communicating it, and expecting it all the way down, which is, if it's happening under my watch, I take full ownership for whatever it is. It doesn't always mean it's fully my fault, but it means I'm going to own that happened on my watch or with my direct report, and I'm going to help make sure that they clean that mess up or that I clean it up. If it's happening next to me or above me, then I'm going to take as much ownership of that as I can. Unless you're the CEO, you're not going to be responsible for every choice the CEO is making. But whatever level of leadership that you are in, taking as much ownership for your peers and for those above you as possible, and then advocating, taking action steps to try to make the culture a healthier one. The fourth thing that people said when they're leaving these organizations and choosing other work was that what could have prevented them was career advancement, or in other words, there was a lack of career advancement. I believe I've touched on this in other episodes, but credentialing DSPs using the NADSP, they've got a wonderful system in place. You do not need to reinvent the wheel, but that has a profound impact. Even if you're not using someone else's system, having even some basic tiers of DSP with very clear pathways to get there can go a long way. In addition to that, having a leadership pipeline where you have some kind of track or some once a month meetings where you're discussing leadership or sort of almost like a manager in training, whether it's a full-fledged program or whether it's a little bit more informal. Now, be transparent. If it's informal, you've got to be clear so that it's not just this good old boys club or some kind of, you need the secret handshake in order to get there. But whether it's more informal or whether it's more formalized, having a clear leadership pipeline also can help with this issue of career advancement. You want to create a long-term future for employees at your organization. And this mindset shows up in decisions around tuition reimbursement. It can show up as far as paid time off or trying to support work-life balance, access to mentoring for your workforce. And then, as I mentioned a minute ago, having very transparent career pathing. So it's not a mystery. So if someone wants to level up their career, that they have some clear goals on how to do that, that it's not a surprise or wait, how did that person get promoted? But making it very clear to everybody. The fifth and last thing that we'll talk about, what could your organization have done to prevent you from leaving your job? Improved staffing, workload, or scheduling. That was the fifth most common response. And this really points to operations. If you're looking at workload, scheduling, staffing, and for this one, I would encourage looking at the whole system and then seeing which inputs can be changed so that we can get different outputs. Sometimes this could look like getting a scheduling software if there's no scheduling software, or if it's a lousy one, then getting a different one. A lot of times these types of fixes don't happen overnight, but even starting to do some short-term, addressing it in the short term while working on the long term can go a long way. Being open and honest with all of your staff about what's working well, but also what's not working well, and then how it is currently being addressed or how it's going to be addressed, and then following through. Gets back to that just golden principle of under promise and then over deliver. In other words, do what you say you're going to do and do it even just a little bit or a lot better than how you say you're going to do it. Talking about what's not working well with the staffing, with those that are on your staff can go a long way so that there's hope that it won't always be like this. And it can really help determine the difference between, well, this is a hiccup in something that otherwise works pretty well versus, no, this ship has holes in the bottom. We are always just using the buckets to shovel that water out. So if you don't like it, too bad. That's just how things are around here. All right, so what's one actionable step from today's episode would be take a look at one of those 5, whichever one jumped out at you the most, and then boom, step right into doing something about it. I would say this, start a conversation, whether that's with your supervisor, if you're not the top boss. If you are the top boss, it's going to be with your team. Start a conversation, have a conversation about one of those 5 reasons that employees are leaving, aimed at what can our organization do if we really owned this. If we said we are not going to let organizational issues get in the way anymore, or we are not going to let the compensation get in the way anymore, whichever one of those 5, own it and ask to your team, to your boss, to your peers, what can we do right now to start to address this? That's my recommended action step for today. Listen, if you found this podcast helpful, would you consider paying it forward? Hit the share button. You could send it to that special someone in your life who is completely stressed out, manager or director. They're always complaining about their staff turnover. Yeah, they probably would be really happy you sent it. It might even make their day. Or alternatively, another way to pay it forward, you could just rate or review this podcast on whichever player you're listening to it on, and that will help other people find it. Well, until next time, here's to you, difference maker. Keep up the amazing work.